Isa vomited a stream of acid as a wave of nausea from the horrific sight overwhelmed the Breen inspector. He had seen many atrocities across the galaxy, but never had he witnessed such brutality from creatures intelligent enough to achieve spaceflight. His mission was to investigate reports of shocking violence committed by human colonists against the gentle native Zephyrians on this frontier world, but little in Isa's centuries of Galactic Council service prepared him for the sheer savagery apparent in the gory remains strewn before him in the clearing. Green sap-like blood pooled around a dozen dismembered Zephyrian corpses, their plant-like limbs and heads scattered about. The sickly sweet stench of death hung thick. Isa could scarcely process that a spacefaring species would be capable of this. His stomach churned acid as he turned to the human colony leader Brian Shaw, searching the man's chiseled face for any hint of remorse or guilt. But Shaw's stern visage was unreadable, devoid of emotion. "What in the cosmos happened here?" Isa demanded, mandibles clicking rapidly in distress. Shaw brushed a hand through his short dark hair. "Colonists were exploring the woods. Zephyrians attacked them. My men defended themselves. Simple as that," he said flatly. Isa's feather crest flared in disbelief. Self-defense? This carnage went far beyond proportionate protection. This was outright slaughter. He opened his beak to argue, but Shaw cut him off. "Let's head back to the colony. We have more to discuss," Shaw said, his tone making it clear the conversation was over. As Isa reluctantly fell into step beside the human, a shiver ran through his wiry frame. What manner of creature could butcher sapience in cold blood without a shred of compassion? He came to Zephyrus to perform an objective inspection. But now Isa feared bearing witness to a much darker truth about humanity's true nature, a truth that could shatter the uneasy intergalactic peace if left unchecked. He would need to muster all his centuries of experience to navigate this species with any hope of forging a path forward. The Galactic Council was relying on him to keep this precarious situation under control. If Isa failed here, the repercussions didn't bear thinking about. This mission was rapidly becoming the greatest challenge of his career, with trillions of lives in the balance. As the inspector and the colony leaders strode through the compound, Isa spotted a cluster of human youths, appearing to be under 10 Earth years of age. The children, gripping toy weapons reminiscent of plasma rifles, were engaged in an unsettling game they referred to as Hunt the Zephyrian. One lone child, adorned in a crude costume of foliage meant to resemble a Zephyrian, was being pursued by the armed group. When the costume child was apprehended, the other youths proceeded to simulate a brutal execution, their actions disturbingly mirroring the gruesome dismemberment Isa had witnessed in the forest earlier. Shaw and Thompson observed the children's play, their faces displaying amusement rather than concern. Soft chuckles even escaped their lips at the macabre spectacle. Isa, his stomach roiling with revulsion, rounded on Shaw. "How can you possibly condone such behavior from your offspring?" he demanded, mandibles clicking rapidly. Shaw appeared taken aback by the Breen's outburst. "They're just playing a harmless game, Inspector," he said, brows furrowed. "It's a way for them to learn about the dangers on this planet. The colonists have lost many friends and loved ones to Zephyrian attacks," Thompson added gruffly. "This is how the children process their fear and anger. Surely you can understand that." Isa's feather crest flared. Understand? No, he couldn't fathom encouraging such brutality in developing minds, no matter the circumstances, but it was apparent that further argument would prove fruitless with these two. "I wish to speak with some of the other colonists," Isa said firmly. "Today, if possible." Shaw and Thompson exchanged a glance, annoyance flickering across their features. After a long moment, Shaw gave a curt nod. "We'll arrange for you to meet with a group this evening," he said, the reluctance in his tone mirroring his second-in-command's irritated expression. "In the meantime, let's continue the tour, shall we?" As Isa followed the two men deeper into the compound, he suppressed a shudder. The inspector had a sinking feeling that the glimpse into human nature he'd witnessed today was a mere prelude of darker revelations to come. As the twin suns set over the colony, casting an eerie orange glow, Izar found himself seated in the mess hall across from 5 human men. Their faces were hardened, etched with the trials of frontier life. Initially, their gazes were openly hostile, viewing Izar as nothing more than a meddling bureaucrat. But as the inspector posed careful questions about their experiences on Zephyrus, the colonists' demeanors began to thaw. Jack Harris, a grizzled veteran with a jagged scar tracing his jawline, leaned forward. "You want to know what it's really like out there? I'll tell you," he said gruffly. "Just last month, my team tracked a big elk creature for days. Damn thing led us deep into Zeph territory." Harris took a swig from his flask before continuing. "When we finally caught up to it, the beast was already dead, wrapped up tight in some sticky shit like spider webs." The other men nodded, their faces grim at the memory. "We should have known it was a trap," Harris spat. "But we were so focused on bringing home that meat we didn't think, so we walked right up to it." He shook his head, jaw clenched. "That's when those fucking Zephs came at us from all sides, vines whipping around like tentacles. We lit 'em up with our plasma rifles until there was nothing left but smoldering piles of mulch." Harris fixed Izar with a haunted stare. "It wasn't until after, when we saw how they'd strung that creature up, that we realized they'd planned the whole thing, lured us in like rats to the slaughter." Izar listened intently, a cold dread settling in his gut. The picture forming was far more complex and disturbing than he had anticipated. It seemed the Zephyrians were not the simple victims he had assumed, but rather active participants in this brutal conflict. As the colonists shared more tales of narrow escapes and friends lost, Izar felt the weight of his task pressing down on him. He would need to dig deeper to unravel the tangled roots of this dangerous feud before it escalated beyond hope of resolution. As the sun rose over the alien landscape, Izar joined Shaw and a dozen battle-hardened colonists on a routine patrol of the colony's perimeter. The humans moved with practiced efficiency, plasma rifles at the ready, eyes scanning the dense foliage for any signs of danger. Izar, unused to the physical exertion, struggled to keep pace as they trekked through the undergrowth. As he pushed aside a particularly large fern, something caught his eye. Strange, pulsating pods hanging from the branches overhead, each about the size of a human torso. "What are those?" Izar asked, pointing a clawed finger at the eerie sight. Shaw glanced up, his expression hardening. "Zephyrian breeding pods," he grunted. "The aliens use them to create new warriors. They're a constant threat to the colony." Izar's feather crest rose in alarm. "How so?" "Each pod can release dozens of fully grown Zephyrians at a moment's notice," Shaw explained grimly. "We have to—" A sickening squelch interrupted him as one of the pods burst open, spilling forth a swarm of Zephyrians. The plant-like aliens immediately lunged at the patrol, their vine-like appendages lashing out with deadly intent. The humans reacted instantly, plasma rifles roaring to life. Searing bolts of energy sliced through the Zephyrians, reducing them to smoldering piles of ash and twisted foliage in a matter of seconds. Izar watched in stunned horror as the colonists dispatched the aliens with ruthless efficiency. The ease with which they killed, the almost casual brutality of it, sent a chill down his spine. As the last Zephyrian fell, the humans set about collecting the charred remains for burning. Izar, his stomach's churning, approached Shaw. "There must be another way," he pleaded, "a way to find peace with the Zephyrians." Shaw, his face splattered with green ichor, shook his head. "Peace? On Zephyrus?" He let out a humorless laugh. "The only way to survive here is to fight. The sooner you understand that, Inspector, the better." With that, he turned and strode away, leaving Izar to grapple with the grim reality of life on this unforgiving world. As Izar trudged through the inky blackness of the Zephyrian night, the inspector found himself questioning the wisdom of his decision. He'd waited until the colony was asleep before slipping out, his mind consumed by a desperate need to find a path to peace. But now, as strange whispers and darting shadows surrounded him in the twisted forest, Izar felt a creeping unease. Suddenly vine-like appendages shot out from the darkness, coiling and writhing around him. Izar froze, his clawed hand reaching slowly for the translator at his belt. A dozen Zephyrians emerged from the gloom, their plant-like bodies swaying in an eerie unison. "I come in peace," Izar said, his voice trembling slightly as the translator broadcast his words. "I seek an end to the conflict between our kinds." To Izar's shock, the Zephyrians responded in flawless English, their tone devoid of inflection or emotion. "We have observed you since your arrival, Inspector," they rasped. "You are unique among the humans. You alone may be shown the truth." Izar's feather crest rose warily. "What truth?" "The truth of this war," the Zephyrians replied. "But you must follow us deeper into the forest. Only there can you understand." Every instinct screamed at Izar to refuse, to flee back to the relative safety of the colony, but the inspector knew he might never have another chance to uncover the roots of this bloody conflict. With a resolute nod, he stepped forward. "Lead on." The Zephyrians guided Izar through the dense undergrowth, moving with an uncanny grace. After what felt like hours, they reached a hidden cave entrance, barely visible beneath the tangled foliage. As Izar followed the aliens into the subterranean darkness, a sense of dread knotted in his gut. Despite his best efforts, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking willingly into a trap. The narrow tunnel opened into a vast cavern, its walls pulsing with bioluminescent veins. In the center of the chamber, a massive tree-like structure rose from the rocky floor, its branches spreading out like a canopy. The Zephyrians led Izar towards the base of the tree, where a small pool of glowing liquid shimmered. Izar hesitated, his mind racing with the potential consequences of imbibing an unknown alien substance. But he had come too far to turn back now. Steeling himself, the inspector knelt beside the pool and cupped his clawed hands, bringing the luminous liquid to his beak. As the fluid slid down his throat, Izar's vision blurred and distorted. The cavern seemed to spin around him, the pulsing veins on the walls throbbing in time with his own heartbeat. Images flashed through his mind, disjointed and chaotic at first, but gradually coalescing into a coherent narrative. Izar saw the Zephyrians as they once were, a peaceful race living in harmony with their forest home. He witnessed the arrival of the first human colonists, their machines tearing through the delicate ecosystem with ruthless efficiency. He felt the Zephyrians' confusion and fear as their world was upended, their pleas for understanding falling on deaf ears. And then Izar saw something that made his blood run cold. He saw the true face of the conflict, the dark secret that lay at the heart of the colony's struggle for survival. The revelation hit him like a physical blow, his mind reeling from the implications. As the visions faded and the cavern came back into focus, Izar found himself surrounded by the Zephyrians, their vine-like appendages coiled around his limbs, holding him in place. The inspector's heart raced as he realized the true nature of the trap he had walked into. But even as fear gripped him, Izar knew that the knowledge he had gained was worth any price. He had to find a way back to the colony, to confront Shaw and the others with the truth. The fate of both races hung in the balance, and Izar was determined to see justice done, no matter the cost. The Zephyrians led Izar deeper into the cavernous chamber, the air growing thick with the heady scent of alien flora. Strange, luminescent mushrooms clung to the damp walls, pulsing softly in hues of vibrant blue and green. Beneath his clawed feet, Izar felt the spongy give of a living carpet of moss and lichen. As they approached the heart of the chamber, the inspector's eyes widened in awe. Before him stood a colossal tree-like structure, its gnarled trunk stretching up into the shadowy recesses of the cave's ceiling. Bioluminescent veins pulsed along its bark, casting an eerie, otherworldly glow. The tree's branches swayed gently, as if moved by an unseen breeze, each limb adorned with shimmering, translucent leaves that chimed softly like delicate bells. Izar stepped closer, marveling at the palpable energy emanating from the tree. He could feel it thrumming through his bones, a deep primal resonance that spoke of ancient power and unfathomable wisdom. "The humans," the Zephyrians continued, their tone laced with sorrow and anger. "They do not understand. They come to our world, tearing down our forests, burning our lands, all in the name of their own expansion. They are destroying not only our home, but the very lifeblood of Zephyrus itself." Izar turned to face the aliens, his feather crest rising in surprise. "But why have you not reached out to them? Surely if they knew the truth, they would seek a peaceful solution." The Zephyrians shook their head, a rustling of leaves and vines. "We have tried, Inspector, but the humans only see us as monsters, as savages to be exterminated. They have no interest in understanding, only in conquest." With a gesture, the aliens revealed the scars and wounds marring their plant-like flesh, plasma burns, deep gashes, and brutal amputations. Each mark told a story of pain and suffering at the hands of the colonists. As Izar listened to their tales of loss and despair, a sickening realization began to dawn on him. The Zephyrians were not the aggressors he had assumed them to be. No, they were the victims, fighting a desperate battle to protect their home and their very existence from the relentless onslaught of human expansion. In that moment, standing before the heart of the forest, surrounded by the wounded and weary Zephyrians, Izar knew that he had been wrong. It was not the aliens who were the monsters on Zephyrus. It was the humans. Izar emerged from the depths of the Zephyrian caves, his mind reeling from the revelations the heart of the forest had bestowed upon him. The human colonists, once seen as pioneers braving an alien world, now appeared as the true monsters of Zephyrus, their actions driven by greed and a disregard for the delicate balance of the planet's ecosystem. With a renewed sense of purpose, Izar strode into the colony's central square, his eyes scanning the faces of the gathered humans. They looked upon him with a mixture of confusion and suspicion, their hands instinctively reaching for the plasma rifles at their sides. "People of Zephyrus," Izar began, his voice amplified by the translator at his neck, "I come bearing a message from the Zephyrians, a truth that has been hidden from us all." Jean stepped forward, his brow furrowed with anger. "Inspector, I suggest you choose your next words carefully. You're treading on dangerous ground." Izar met Shaw's gaze unflinchingly. "The Zephyrians are not our enemy. They are the guardians of this world, the protectors of the very life force that sustains us all. And we, in our ignorance and arrogance, have been destroying it." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the crowd, but Izar pressed on. "The heart of the forest, the source of the Zephyrians' power, is dying, and with it, so too will Zephyrus. We must stop this madness, this senseless slaughter, before it's too late." Jean's face contorted with rage. "You've been brainwashed by those monsters, Inspector. They've filled your head with lies and propaganda." Izar shook his head. "No, Shaw. It is you who have been lying to your people, leading them down a path of destruction and death. I have seen the truth with my own eyes, and I will not stand by and watch as you destroy this world and its inhabitants." Shaw's hand dropped to his plasma pistol, his fingers tightening around the grip. "I'll not have you poisoning the minds of my people, Inspector. You're under arrest for treason against the colony." Izar, realizing that he could not reason with the humans, made a split-second decision. He turned and sprinted towards the colony's armory, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that he had only one chance to put an end to the violence, to give the Zephyrians a fighting chance at survival. Bursting through the armory doors, Izar quickly located a cache of plasma grenades, their casings glinting in the dim light. Working quickly, he began to place the grenades strategically throughout the armory, his fingers trembling with adrenaline. Just as he was about to arm the final grenade, the sound of footsteps echoed behind him. Izar spun around, his plasma rifle at the ready, to find Thompson and a group of armed colonists blocking the exit. "Drop your weapon, Inspector," Thompson ordered, his own rifle trained on Izar's chest. "It's over." But Izar knew that he could not surrender. Not now, not when the fate of an entire world hung in the balance. With a defiant roar, he opened fire, his plasma bolts searing the air as he dove for cover behind a stack of crates. The armory erupted into chaos, the air thick with the smell of ozone and burning metal, as the two sides exchanged fire. Izar, his reflexes honed by years of training, managed to hold his own against the superior numbers of the colonists, his plasma rifle spitting death with every squeeze of the trigger. But even as he fought, he knew that time was running out. The grenades, their timers ticking down with each passing second, were his only hope of stopping the humans and their relentless march of destruction. Just as he was about to make his final stand, a voice cut through the din of battle. "Izar!" Shaw shouted, his plasma pistol leveled at the inspector's head. "It's over. Surrender now, and I'll make your death a quick one." With a final desperate cry, Izar lunged for the detonator, his fingers closing around the trigger just as Shaw's plasma bolt seared through his shoulder. The pain was excruciating, but Izar pushed through it, his thumb depressing the button with a final defiant click. The world erupted in a blinding flash of light and heat, the force of the explosion sending Izar flying backwards into the wall of the armory. The last thing he saw before the darkness claimed him was the look of horror on Shaw's face as the flames consumed him, the once proud colony leader reduced to ashes in the blink of an eye. The world spun and twisted as Izar emerged from the darkness, his senses gradually sharpening to reveal the destruction that surrounded him. The human colony lay in ruins, the once proud structures reduced to smouldering heaps of rubble and twisted metal. Izar tried to move, but a searing pain shot through his body, forcing him to remain still. He looked down to see his once pristine uniform now tattered and stained with his own blood, the fabric charred by the heat of the explosion. Suddenly, a flurry of movement caught his eye, and he watched in amazement as a group of Zephyrians emerged from the shadows, their vine-like appendages cutting through the smoke and debris like knives. Izar tried to call out to them, but his voice was little more than a hoarse whisper, his throat raw from the acrid smoke that filled the air. The Zephyrians, however, seemed to sense his presence, and they moved towards him with a speed and grace that belied their plant-like nature. They gathered around him, their cool, smooth appendages wrapping gently around his battered body as they lifted him from the rubble. Izar felt a strange sense of peace wash over him as they carried him away from the devastation, his mind drifting in and out of consciousness as they moved through the twisted remains of the colony. When he finally awoke, Izar found himself back in the heart of the forest, his body resting on a bed of soft, luminescent moss. He could feel the strange, alien energy of the Zephyrians flowing through him, knitting his wounds and repairing his shattered bones with a speed and efficiency that defied belief. As he lay there, listening to the gentle rustling of the leaves and the soft, pulsing hum of the heart itself, Izar learned of the events that had transpired in his absence. The Zephyrians, it seemed, had taken advantage of the chaos caused by the explosion to launch a devastating counterattack against the humans. Armed with the very weapons they had stolen from the colony's armory, the Zephyrians had unleashed a barrage of plasma fire upon the remaining colonists, their aim true and their resolve unwavering. At the same time, they had released a host of bioengineered plagues upon the humans, the microscopic agents of destruction sweeping through the colony like a lethal wind. The humans, caught off guard and woefully unprepared for such an assault, had been decimated in a matter of hours. Those who survived the initial onslaught had been forced to retreat to a handful of heavily fortified bunkers, their numbers dwindling with each passing day. Izar, his heart heavy with the weight of the lives lost on both sides, knew that he had to act. He was uniquely positioned to broker a ceasefire between the two warring factions, his understanding of both the humans and the Zephyrians giving him a perspective that no one else possessed. And so, with a heavy heart and a sense of grim determination, Izar set out for the ruins of the colony once more. He picked his way through the rubble and the debris, the stench of death and decay hanging heavy in the air. When he finally reached the bunkers, he was greeted by the haggard faces of the surviving colonists, their eyes hollow and their spirits broken. Izar met with Shaw and the other leaders, his words soft but insistent, as he pleaded with them to lay down their arms and leave Zephyrus in peace. He spoke of the Zephyrians' connection to the planet, of the damage that the humans had wrought in their quest for domination. He argued that the only way forward was to surrender, to accept that they had no right to be on this world and to leave before any more lives were lost. But Shaw, His face, a mask of stubborn defiance, refused to listen. He looked Izar in the eye and told him, in no uncertain terms, that the humans would never surrender. They would fight to the last man, woman, and child to defend what was theirs, even if it meant the destruction of Zephyrus itself. Izar stood before the heart of the forest, the ancient tree pulsing with an otherworldly energy that suffused the chamber with an eerie, greenish glow. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying vegetation, and the only sound was the soft rustling of leaves in a breeze that seemed to emanate from the heart itself. Gathered around the tree were the Zephyrian elders, their gnarled bodies swaying gently in time with the pulsing of the heart. They turned as one to face Izar, their eyes glowing with the same eerie light that emanated from the tree itself. "Inspector Izar," one of the elders spoke, its voice a dry, rasping whisper that seemed to come from the very roots of the tree. "We have brought you here because we believe that you are the key to ending this conflict once and for all." Izar stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The elder gestured to the heart of the forest, its branches swaying gently in the breeze. "The heart is not just a source of life for our people," it said. "It is also a weapon of immense power. By channeling the energy of the forest through our own bodies, we can create a psychic shockwave that will overwhelm the minds of the humans, rendering them catatonic." Izar felt a chill run down his spine. "But that would be genocide," he said, his voice trembling. "You can't possibly—" "We have no choice," another elder interrupted, its voice harsh and unyielding. "The humans will not stop until they have destroyed everything we hold dear. This is the only way to save our species and our planet." The first elder bowed its head, its eyes closing for a moment. "We will be destroyed," it said softly. "The energy required to create the shockwave will consume us utterly, but it is a sacrifice we are willing to make for the sake of our people." Izar felt tears welling up in his eyes. He had come to Zephyrus to broker peace, but now he was being asked to participate in an act of unimaginable destruction. But what choice did he have? The humans would not listen to reason, and the Zephyrians were facing extinction. I don't know if I can do this," he said, his voice breaking. "I came here to find a peaceful solution, not to be party to genocide." The elders looked at him, their eyes glowing with a fierce intensity. "You are the only one who can help us, Inspector Izar," one of them said. "Your unique perspective as an outsider will be invaluable in ensuring that the shockwave affects all of the humans. Without you, we may not be able to save our people." Izar closed his eyes, his heart heavy with the weight of the decision he was being asked to make. He thought of the colonists, their faces twisted with hatred and fear. He thought of the Zephyrians, their bodies broken and bleeding from the humans' attacks. And he thought of the countless lives that would be lost if the conflict was allowed to continue. In the end, there was only one choice he could make. The elders bowed their heads, their eyes closing in silent thanks. They gestured for Izar to take his place among them, and he stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. As he took his place at the base of the heart of the forest, Izar could feel the energy of the planet coursing through his body, filling him with a sense of power and purpose, unlike anything he had ever known. He closed his eyes, surrendering himself to the will of the heart, and felt the world around him fade away until there was nothing left but the pulsing energy of the forest and the silent screams of the dying. As the Zephyrians began their ritual, Izar's heart raced as a sudden surge of doubt flooded his mind. The once clear path to peace now seemed murky and uncertain. Izar realized with dawning horror that by aiding the Zephyrians in this terrible act, he was betraying his own kind, condemning the human colonists to a fate of eternal catatonia, their minds forever trapped in an endless void. In that moment of stark clarity, Izar understood a fundamental truth. For all their flaws, their violence, their cruelty, the humans were still his people, his species, and he could not, in good conscience, be party to their destruction, no matter how noble the Zephyrians' cause might be. Izar opened his mouth to voice his dissent, to put a stop to this before it was too late. But the ritual was already underway. Ancient words in the Zephyrian tongue echoed through the chamber with a resonant power. The energy of the forest, the life force of Zephyrus itself, began to flow into Izar's body. It flooded his veins with liquid fire, searing his every nerve ending. He could feel his mind beginning to merge with the collective consciousness of the Zephyrians. Their thoughts, their emotions, their ancient wisdom and pain, all of it poured into his psyche like a torrential flood. It was too much, too fast. Izar felt his very identity beginning to dissolve, subsumed by the overpowering presence of the alien hive mind. But even as he teetered on the brink of oblivion, Izar clung to one last desperate hope. If he could not stop the ritual, perhaps he could at least give the humans a chance to survive it. Marshalling every ounce of his rapidly dwindling willpower, Izar focused his mind like a laser beam, projecting a final warning to the human colonists. Jean Thompson Harris, he called out to each of them in turn, his psychic voice tinged with urgency and desperation. "Flee!" he screamed into their minds. "Get to your ships. Leave this planet now before it's too late." At the same time, Izar fought to disrupt the ritual from within, pitting his own nascent psychic abilities against the combined might of the Zephyrian elders. It was like trying to hold back a tsunami with a paper umbrella. The strain of that mental battle shattered Izar's already faltering psyche like glass. With a final desperate surge of psychic energy, Izar severed his connection to the heart of the forest. The shock of that psychic backlash was like a thermonuclear bomb going off in his brain. The Zephyrian ritual collapsed in on itself, the elders' chant devolving into a cacophony of agonized shrieks. The backlash of uncontrolled psychic energy tore through the Zephyrians like wildfire, reducing their plant-like bodies to piles of desiccated mulch in seconds. Izar, too, was consumed by that storm of destructive power, his physical form vaporizing into a cloud of glowing particles that swirled away on the etheric currents. But even as Izar succumbed to oblivion, he took some small solace in knowing that his sacrifice had not been in vain. The human survivors, heeding his psychic warning, scrambled aboard their ships and blasted into the sky, fleeing Zephyrus just as the world began to die around them. From orbit, they watched in horror and fascination as the once verdant jungles of Zephyrus withered and turned brown, the life force of the planet snuffed out like a candle by the failed ritual. In the end, there were no victors in this conflict, only victims. The Zephyrians paid the ultimate price for their hubris, their great civilization reduced to ashes and dust, and the humans, though they survived, would forever bear the scars of the horrors they had endured on this world. But amidst all the tragedy and devastation, Izar's final act stood as a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, compassion and self-sacrifice could still light the way, that the road to peace was always worth walking, no matter how steep the cost. The settlers watched from their viewports as the brown blight consumed Zephyrus, the sickly color spreading across the planet's surface like a fast-moving bruise. Izar's final warning echoed in their minds, a ghostly whisper from beyond the veil of death itself. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.